Hola, buenas tardes. Es para mí
Good
un
evening.
placer dar la bienvenida al inicio de
It's a
este
pleasure for
último
me to
acto,
welcome
último encuentro
this last act,
de AXA, eh, no
this
sé cómo
last meeting
definir
for ASA.
2020, este año
I wouldn't
horrible
know how to define
año.
this year, this
Y
2020
bueno,
year,
pues
this
lo
horrible
vamos
year.
a hacer abordando hoy la
But we are
temática
going
de
to do that by focusing
descarbonización, la
on the theme of
arquitectura como activo
decarbonization
ambiental y la ola
and the
renovadora.
architecture as an
Ahora,
environmental active.
después de mí, intervendrá Miguel Ángel Díaz
Now,
Camacho,
after
que
my
como presidente de
intervention,
la
will be
Junta
speaking
Directiva
Miguel
de
Ángel Díaz
ASA,
Camacho
pues
as president
presentará a
of
cada
ASA.
uno de los intervinientes.
We'll
Sí
be
quería yo
introducing each of the
dar un
speakers,
saludo pues a cada
but I
uno de
wanted
ellos, empezando
to greet
por Judith
each of
Lipian.
them.
Hi, Judith.
Started
Pleasure.
by
Say
Judith
hello.
Kimpin,
Iñaki Alonso Echeverría y Ramón López, y bueno, y
Iñaki
por supuesto Miguel
Alonso
Ángel, un
Echevarría, Ramón
saludo
López,
para
and Miguel
todos
Ángel.
vosotros.
Greeting to you.
Decir brevemente que para Cosentino,
I would like to
como
say
parte
previously that for
del
Cosentino,
propósito de compañía, del propósito
as part
corporativa,
of our
tenemos
company
integrado
goals, our
el valor de
corporate
la
goals, we have
sostenibilidad.
integrated the
Lo
value of
hicimos, lo
sustainability.
actualizamos en marzo de
We
este
did
año,
so
2020,
and updated it on
de tal
March of
forma que
2020,
ahora nuestro propósito como compañía es
so that our
inspirar a las
goal now as a
personas
company is to
a
inspire
través
people
de espacios innovadores y sostenibles.
through innovative
Esta
spaces and
incorporación de la
sustainable spaces.
sostenibilidad
This incorporation
pretendemos
of
que sea algo más
sustainability
que un
is meant
término, que una
to
palabra
be
añadida a nuestro
something
día a
more
día en la
than
empresa,
merely
y
a word,
procuramos integrarlo en la acción
and
del
we are
día a día
aiming
de
to
nuestra
integrate it into the everyday
compañía
action of our
con
company
hechos relevantes y determinantes
through
de este
facts, through
valor
relevant
de esta
facts, and
sostenibilidad.
determining facts of this
Hemos
value.
tenido en estos días la celebración del quinto
We have
aniversario
had
de los
during these days
acuerdos
the celebration of
de
the
París.
fifth anniversary of
Bueno, pues
the
os comento
Paris
pues que la
agreements
última
that have been
aspiración
up to the
de la
date, the
humanidad
last
y de
aspiration
Naciones
of
Unidas
humanity
para alcanzar objetivos
and the United
en pro
Nations
de
to
esa
achieve
sostenibilidad
goals
necesaria que salve al planeta Tierra del
in pro
actual
of
cambio
sustainability that can
climático.
save the
Y
planet
bueno,
Earth
pues la
and
gran
climate
alegría
change,
también del Consejo Europeo
and the
del
great
pasado
joy that
fin
we
de
have
semana, del día 11
to
de
have
diciembre,
the European
que
Council on the
acordó
11th of December
elevar del
that made
40%
the
hasta el
agreement to elevate from
55%
40%
la
to
reducción de emisiones
55% the
para el año
reduction of emissions
2030. Esto ha sido una de las
by the
mejores
year 2030.
decisiones, de
This has
las
been
mejores
one of the
noticias
best
que se ha
decisions
podido
and the best
alcanzar
news
en
that
este
we might
año
have
que ya
received
está muy cerca de finalizar y que
during this
nosotros
year that is
celebramos
already
y que
so close to finishing,
brindamos
and that
porque
we
se pueda
celebrate
conseguir
and we
como
cheer
una
that
aportación de verdad en esa agenda
we
de la
can
sostenibilidad.
achieve
Sin
that
más
agenda of sustainability.
dilaciones, agradecer a todos los que
Without any
estáis
more ado, I
participando
would like to
esta tarde,
thank you
y
to everyone
Miguel
participating
Ángel,
this
pues
evening.
te cedo la
And
palabra.
Miguel
Un
Ángel,
saludo.
I let you speak now. And
Muy bien,
greetings.
muchas gracias, Santiago.
Very well,
Un
thank you very
placer
much,
agradecer
Santiago.
otra vez a Cosentino
It's been a
la
pleasure, and I
posibilidad
would like to
de
thank Cosentino the
desarrollar
possibility
estos encuentros
of
de arquitectura en
developing these
positivo.
meetings
Lo hemos llamado este año.
about
Ha sido una serie de
architecture in
6
positive.
encuentros
So
divididos
it's
en
been a
dos
series
ciclos
of
de
6
3 y
meetings
3.
divided
Y
by
este es
2 cycles of 3 by
el
3.
último de los 6 que cierra un poco todo
And this will be the
este
last of
ciclo
the
que
6
vimos
that will
en el
be closing
2019.
up all this
Tuvimos
cycle
a
that
bien llamarlo
we
arquitectura
imparted
en positivo sin saber
on
un poco la que nos venía encima,
2019
¿no? Como decía Santiago, un año
without
complicado,
knowing
difícil.
the
Y
future
bueno, nosotros
exactly.
hemos estado hablando,
It
sin
has been a
embargo, pues,
complicated year,
de
and we have
transformación,
been
diferentes
speaking about
transiciones
transformation,
que pensamos
about
que la
different
arquitectura
transitions that
debe
we think
desarrollar o
that
debe abordar,
architecture should develop
está abordando ya, pero
or
debe abordar quizá con más
should tackle
profundidad en los próximos años,
with more
¿no?
profundity.
Así que, como decía, agradecer a Cosentino, agradecer también a
So
la
I would
Junta
like to
Directiva de
thank
ASA,
Cosentino.
que
I would like to
trabaja duro
thank
para que estos
the
encuentros se
CEO
puedan
of
celebrar,
ASA
al Comité
who
Científico,
worked very
que nos
hard
apoya en
to
todas
make it
las
into these meetings and has
iniciativas, ¿no?
supported
Y
us
nos da soporte,
in every
y también,
initiative
por
and
supuesto, a todos
project.
los socios de ASA, ¿no? ASA es
And of
una
course, to every
asociación sin ánimo
associate
de
of
lucro, somos
ASA,
casi 500
it is a
arquitectos,
non-lucrative
lo que, bueno, muchos ya
association
nos conocéis,
with over
pero
500
bueno, venimos
architects.
desarrollando labores de
Many of you
difusión, de
already know us, but
pedagogía,
we have
de
been
análisis de diferentes normativas, de
developing
diferentes
some
decretos,
projects on
bueno, pues
diffusion
con el
of
ánimo
information and on
de que
different
la
decisions,
arquitectura vaya en el camino en
with
el que
the
avanzan
aim that
prácticamente todas las
architecture
sociedades en este momento, ¿no?
can progress the
En
path
este
that is taking
sentido,
the society.
el encuentro de hoy
In
sobre
this sense,
descarbonización es
today's
un encuentro que
meeting about
tiene muchísimas
decarbonization
aristas
is
y,
a
de
meeting
hecho,
that has a
claro,
lot of
cuando hablamos
angles.
de descarbonización, podríamos hablar
So when
del
we talk
transporte,
about
podríamos hablar de la industria,
decarbonization, we
pero
could
en este
talk
caso
about
nos vamos a
logistics,
centrar
we could talk about
solamente en el
industry, but
sector
in
de
this
la
case, we
construcción.
are going to focus on the construction sector.
Si queréis, por no entrar demasiado en
If
detalle,
you
porque
want,
creo que los tres ponentes que presentaré a continuación lo van a
because I
desarrollar
wouldn't
muy
like
bien, cada
to
uno en
get
su
into too
ámbito.
much detail.
La descarbonización o el carbono, podemos hablar de un
Decarbonization,
carbono
we could talk
en el
about
régimen de funcionamiento de un edificio y el
we could
carbono embebido en los
talk about
propios
carbon
sistemas y procesos
within
o
the
materiales que
life of
tiene
a
este
building
edificio, ¿no? Yo
and within the
diferenciaría muy bien
process
estas
and the
dos
materials
áreas
that are inside the
por fijar
building.
un poco los temas
There are
comunes
two
o los temas
different
sabidos
main
ya
areas,
de los que
just to
vais a
connect
transitar todos
the
los
main
ponentes y
themes and main
seguramente
areas that
luego el
we'll
debate,
be
¿no?
speaking
En
about, all
cuanto al
these
carbono
speakers.
operativo, al primero, al que se produce durante el
Speaking about the
funcionamiento de los
operative
edificios,
carbon
pues no cabe
produced
duda que
during the
reducir la
functioning of the
demanda
buildings,
sería uno de los grandes retos que
undoubtedly
llevamos
lowering the demand
en
is one of the
España y la Unión
main
Europea
goals,
muchos años trabajando, ¿no?
and in the
La
European
eficiencia
Union,
energética también llamada, a mí me gusta hablar más de reducción de demanda.
or energetic efficiency that
En
we could
segundo lugar,
talk
quizá el
about
aporte
it.
de renovables, al mismo tiempo que
And
necesitamos
secondly,
menos energía,
the
además esa
support of
energía la vamos a
renewable
aportar
energy.
con renovables, ¿no?
We
La
need less energy, but
electrificación, que
also
es una
the
realidad,
energy we
y
use
tener
is going to
ya
come from
instalaciones
renewables.
100%
The
eléctricas,
energification of the
libres de
buildings, with
cualquier tipo de
buildings that are
combustible,
already
combustible
100%
fósil.
electric,
Y sin duda
free
son
of any
retos
kind of
que hay
fossil fuel.
apuntando y algunos seguro que se dan
And
cuenta
without any
hacia
doubt,
apuntar hacia
this
la
kind of
rehabilitación, ¿no?
challenges
Como
are
un
pointing
sector
to the
estratégico clave,
rehabilitation
así lo
as
hemos
a
definido
tactic
en el
sector, a
conjunto
strategic
de la Unión
sector.
Europea y también en
And we
España.
have defined as such in the
A mí me gustaría
in the
añadir
context of
para
the
la
European Union and
rehabilitación
Spain.
y para la obra nueva,
I would like to
pues
add, in the
las
sense
soluciones
of
propietarias, las soluciones de la
rehabilitation,
arquitectura, las soluciones que aportan valor,
the solution that
especialmente
can add
tradicionalmente,
value
como puede ser la
from
galería,
architecture
el
and have
patio, el
been traditionally
alféizar,
implemented,
la
like
doble
galleries,
cubierta y la cubierta medio y
squares,
otras tantas, ¿no? La luz y
different
la
kind of
ventilación
covers,
natural, por ejemplo, y
or
que me
light
ha
or
gustado
natural
mucho,
ventilation.
o he tenido el placer de verlas reflejadas en
And then
la ASA
I
2020,
had
¿no?
the
La estrategia
pleasure
a largo plazo
to see them
para la
reflected in
rehabilitación
the
energética en el
long-term
sector de la
strategy
edificación de España,
for the
impulsado
rehabilitation,
por el PINDA y también en otras
energetic
muchas iniciativas que
rehabilitation
nos
for
va a contar
2020.
Ramón, que tiene la
And
oportunidad
also
de
through
su
many different
presentación,
directives and
que nos va a
legislation that
contar
Fernando is going to
desde el
talk
ámbito
about,
europeo y que nos va a contar
and that Judith also is
también
going to
la
talk about
parte
from the
profesional.
European perspective.
La segunda parte, y termino con la introducción, que no es tanto el
The second
carbono
part,
operativo,
and
sino
I'm
el
gonna
carbono
finish with
embebido en
this,
los materiales,
will not
pues también
deal so
abre
much for
un
a
baúl
carbon
de
active, but
bastantes líneas de temas.
carbon
Hemos hecho
residing in
encuentros
materials.
monográficos sobre cada uno de ellos, ¿no?
We
Y
have
que se centran
been
más en los
making
sistemas, en
different
los procesos, en
monographic
los propios materiales, ¿no? Que
presentations
tiene que ver
on
con el
both.
análisis de ciclo de
It is more
vida, con la
focusing on the
sostenibilidad,
materials and the cycle of
con el
life,
CSR, ¿no? Que hablábamos hace tiempo, de
of
reducción,
circular economy,
reutilización y reciclaje,
on
y que tiene
reduction,
que ver también con los
reutilization,
procesos de
and
industrialización, a los
which
que
also has to do with
hablas de ecología e
reindustrialization
industrialización,
processes.
que eran como dos temas
For those who
un
want to speak
poco
about ecology
separados
or
hace muchos
environment
años
and
y
industrialization,
poco a poco
that seem to be
tienden
many
a
years
encontrarse
ago
con
very
los materiales de
separated topics,
origen
and that
biológico, en
have
cualquier
been
caso materiales
finding mutual ground
con tráfico ambiental de
in the last
productos. Es decir,
years.
nos abre este carbono embebido
It is
en
opening
los materiales, nos
many doors.
abre, y en los procesos, nos abre innumerables campos de investigación y desarrollo en el que he trabajando
It's
muchísimas
opening many
personas
doors
en
and
diferentes
many
ámbitos,
fields
tanto
of
en el
research that
ámbito
many people have been
de la
working on,
investigación, que sabéis que siempre nos gusta tener,
both
como en el
in
ámbito de la
terms of
expertise,
research,
como en el ámbito de la
as in
práctica
terms of
profesional. En este caso,
institutions, but also in
en este
in
encuentro
professional practice.
tenemos bueno, pues
For
tres
this
ponentes
meeting,
de primerísimo nivel.
we have three
Me
different
gustaría,
speakers of
con su
first grade
generosidad,
that we would like to
participar,
introduce
pasar un rato con
and express our
nosotros, dedicarnos
major
unas
generosity
horas de su
for
tiempo.
spending some
Todos
time with
estamos
us
muy
and
liados
some hours
y,
of
bueno,
their time.
desde ASA
We are all very busy,
agradecemos
and
mucho a todos
we would
los
like to
ponentes
thank
de hoy,
you very
especialmente
much
esta semana, esta
to every
semana difícil,
speaker.
la última antes de Navidad, y bueno, queremos
And this has
agradeceros
been a
de
especially
toda la
difficult week,
familia,
so we want
mandaros
to
un
make a
abrazo a los
special
ponentes
thank
y
you
agradeceros mucho que estéis hoy
and to
aquí.
send you a hug.
Presento brevemente, en primer lugar va a hablar
I'm going to
Judith
briefly
Kimpian.
introduce
Judith Kimpian
Judith
es la
Kimpian.
directora del área de sostenibilidad del Consejo Europeo
She's a
de
chair for
Arquitectos.
Sustainability
Nos
Group
va a dar un poco
Architects,
la visión desde las instituciones
and
europeas,
she's
¿no?
going
Un poco cómo este
to
tema se
offer
está
us
abordando desde
the
allí,
perspective of the
cómo
European institution, how the
desde el
topic is
Consejo
being
Europeo de
aborded from there,
Arquitectos, integrado por todos los consejos
and how
europeos
from the
nacionales,
Sustainability
en los
Group
que tengo el
Architects,
placer de participar en este grupo, como
which is
parte
integrated
del
from
Consejo
all the
también,
national groups.
pues bueno, no quiero anticiparos nada, pero se trabaja muy
I
duro
didn't want to
y
spoil
serio
anything, but
y
they have
contrastar
been
un poco lo que
working
va
very
haciendo
hard
aquí, por ejemplo, aquí
and
están
a lot,
haciendo en Austria,
and
aquí
it's
están
going to
haciendo
be
en
very
Portugal,
interesting to
aquí están
contrast
haciendo
what
en
they are
Finlandia, aquí
doing
están haciendo en
in
diferentes
different
países,
countries, in Finland
también un
and
poco para
different countries,
posicionarnos nosotros, ¿no? En
so that we
segundo
can
lugar, hablará
position
Iñaki Alonso,
ourselves.
que es CEO y
In the
socio
second place will
fundador de
be
SAT
speaking Iñaki
Arquitectura,
Alonso,
Ecómetro,
which is CEO and founding partner
bueno,
of SAT
conocido
Arquitectura
socio
and the
de ASA y
Ecometry.
también fue junta en su
He's a
momento,
very
así
well-known
que bueno,
member of
Iñaki
ASA.
no hay que darle la bienvenida porque siempre está.
And we don't need to welcome him because he's always with us. And lastly, Ramon Lopez, also a close collaborator with ASA. He's a forest technical engineer and part of the Spanish Agency for Climatic Change. He's going to offer us the perspective of the institutions, but from the Spanish perspective, and especially with the high activity that you have been carrying out lately. You're going to be the last, but we are anticipating your presentation. So with anything more to add, I want to lend the word to Judith. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me today. It's delightful to be able to engage with you and your members and everyone present today. I'm afraid my Spanish is not entirely up to scratch, so I'm going to have to speak in English, and I hope that what I'm going to say will resonate with what you've just introduced. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Architects Council of Europe's perspective on EU policy initiatives, give you a little overview of new developments, the challenges, and what approaches are helpful for architects, and what are the things that we should be asking more of, and what are the things that we should pay attention to when we are discussing with policymakers and implementing practices on the ground. So ACE has been working for many years with the European Commission. If you could, next slide, please. Yeah, so it's just a very quick diagram of ACE working with the different EU organizations, so the council, towards the Council, the Parliament, and the Commission, and also working with our 43 member organizations in 31 countries, representing over 600,000 architects in Europe. We also work internationally with other organizations, and you'll see some of the logos of other NGOs that we are regularly in contact with. Our purpose is to advance the architectural community's interest and high quality architecture in the built environment. And in terms of sustainable architecture, that has we have had, obviously we are facing huge challenges, but at the same time we're also finding we're pushing increasingly at an open door. Next slide, please. So many of you will be aware about EU climate initiatives. The EU climate action has been agreed recently, reducing 55% of greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, and for the EU to become climate neutral by 2050. Next. And the EU Green Deal, which is looking at achieving major cuts in greenhouse gas emissions in the research that's required to achieve that and to preserve the environment. And to this end, the initiatives that are most relevant for architecture in the built environment, sorry about the helicopter noise, is the Circular Economy Action Plan, the Construction Products Directive, and the revision of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, as well as the Renovation Wave. Next, please. In terms of the Circular Economy Action Plan, it's looking to cut waste and pollution. And what we find often less mentioned is the cultural value of buildings, the adaptability of buildings, the resilience, and the quality of the built environment. ACE is really arguing for a new approach, so not just accounting for the environmental impacts, but a new approach to design for lifespan and also design by lifespan. So how do we extend the lifespan of the buildings and the interventions that we create? And then how do we differentiate within our designs the different lifespan of the components that we configure in our buildings, so that they are easily maintained, disassembled, reused, and recycled based on their lifespan, and how to account for these cycles in differentiating build-ups and finishes and the building's configuration. Next, please. In terms of the construction products regulation, we are really pushing for transparency in the quality of the building products. The ultimate challenge for architects is to find materials and products that match, that perform equally well as currently specified products, but they cost at least as much or less than mainstream solutions applied. And to this end, we need accessible and robust data disclosed through environmental product declarations, the proliferation of these in the sector, and also innovative tools to embed these quickly and efficiently in design proposals. Next, please. In terms of the renovation wave, the aims of the renovation is to obviously accelerate the transformation of our building stock, reducing fuel poverty. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of the European Bauhaus movement, which is, it's the first time that we're beginning to talk about the cultural value of buildings alongside the sustainability, so the measurable performative aspects of buildings. And it's crucially important that these two converge in our view. As you know, as part of the renovation wave, where each country is going to, there's a long-term renovation strategy being prepared, and each country is going to be required to create a national energy and climate plan. Within this, ASA's position is to support the whole building approach. It's really astonishing for me to listen in conferences and in debates and publications and realize that most approaches are still focusing on fabric first approach only and not on the whole building approach. There's a huge big difference between the value that we create by focusing on an architectural reconfiguration of the building instead of just focusing on a fabric first approach. And not only that, but also we are looking to support and track initiatives that combine green neighborhood renewal and support local self-organization with advice from architectural professions, engineering, landscape, legal advice, and providing this at local level to allow communities to apply. So local communities are most interested in public realm interventions. They're not very interested in energy renovation, and they're entirely, well, they often are not interested in the intricacies of carbon saving, let's put it that way. But the local self-organization that you can create via the green renewal of public realm is the same vehicle and the same mechanism that you need for upscaling retrofit or green retrofit in individual buildings. And so we're looking to work with the Commission on tracking the initiatives that work really well. Next, please. I wanted to just give you a very quick introduction to the EU levels framework. The Energy Performance of Buildings Directive wasn't due to be reviewed until 2026, and we're delighted that this is now being opened for revision and potentially, we don't know for sure, but replacement with a Sustainable Buildings Directive. The Architects Council has long been involved with the development of the EU levels framework, which looks at not just energy, but greenhouse gas emissions, material impacts, water consumption, and together with indoor environmental quality, climate change resilience, and life cycle cost and value. Next, please. So what we are looking is for a holistic reporting framework to underpin the multiple EU initiatives, so the New Deal, the EPBD revision, the public procurement routes, the development of new standards, the smart readiness of buildings, what data we are using and extracting from buildings and how we use those, and obviously the national 2030 target. Next, please. So the number one challenge, the built environment accounts for about 40% of CO2 emissions, 12% of water use, nearly 60% of waste created. Next, please. And we know that 80% of the 2050 stock is already in place, and that means that all new and refurbished buildings should be targeting net zero right now. Next, please. We know that that improvements in carbon emissions are actually not down to the improving performance of our building stock, but largely due to the decarbonization of the grid, which this diagram shows. The reductions from buildings has been absolutely minimal. Next, please. And we also need that know that there is a huge need for high quality data and benchmarks for those performative aspects that can be measured. And next please. And that we also need to understand the qualitative. So at the same time, we need to focus on the qualitative aspects of high quality architecture and how we achieve that. Next, please. So the first thing we need to do is redefine building performance as not just apologies, not just the resources used, i.e. energy, water, and materials, but next please, the quality of the environment that we achieve with that, and in that comfort and well-being, climate change resilience, and the adaptability of buildings, pardon me, and social, economic, and environmental value. Next, please. And we need to do that, keep clicking, please, over a building's lifespan. So from product to construction to use to end of life and also beyond life. Next, please. As my colleague Peter Andreas Satrup from the Danish Architectural Chamber often says, we spend 90% of our time in buildings and 100% of it in the built environment. So what can we do? First of all, we can measure to manage the things that are measurable, but we need to do this in a harmonized way from design to operation. So we need to focus on the material, so the life cycle impact of the building, the measured indoor environmental quality. We also need to understand how occupants perceive our buildings, and then have the various costs, life cycle cost, maintenance costs, and value creation that we trigger as architects. Next, please. And often a tricky word is accountability. So at the moment, it's very difficult to say that what we set out to do at the beginning of a project actually is delivered. And architects always complain that they are powerless in this process. And one of the reasons why we are powerless is because A, these metrics are not harmonized from design to operation. And secondly, because we don't, there's no requirement to compare what we set out to do in terms of sustainability and what actually gets delivered from planning to design to procurement to use. And that also means that we really find it hard to learn and accelerate the development of innovative and new techniques and technologies. Next, please. So often we end up comparing apples and pears over the life cycle of the building. Next, please, and different stages of project. So one of the initiatives of the Architects Council is to close the energy performance gap and also to close the life cycle performance gap. So because the difference that we see between what we set out to do and what happens in reality, as you have seen in my first slide, we have not come significantly closer to improving the performance of our building stock until now, despite the increasingly stringent regulations. So it's not that architects don't like to do scheduling. We like to do scheduling that actually matters, that makes a difference, that we can, next please, that we can use to balance the different conflicting drivers during design. So Are we going for taller floor heights, but thereby increasing the embodied carbon of a building? Or are we going for lower floor to ceiling heights, but at the same time lowering the heating load for a building? And how do we balance these? So these are day-to-day decisions that architects need to make, but we often don't have the data and the tools to do that. Secondly, next slide, please. Because of the lack of harmonization, we really find it hard to know what to embed into contracts. We know that the only thing that gets delivered on the building side is something that's been embedded into a contract and the scope of works for architects and the wider project team. So this is just a quick slide from something we've been developing over the years on how to create what we call a building performance register that tracks the sustainability features of a building from design to operation. Next, please. And we find that when you embed feedback from the very beginning of a project, the cost of doing this comparison or the feedback process is minimal. Whereas if you have to do it with hindsight, it's far too costly for a project to undertake it, and it costs significantly more time and effort to do it, which is why it's very rarely done. Next, please. One of the things that we have learned from projects where we have studied buildings in use is that one of the reasons why buildings don't end up consuming as little energy as we think, or as few resources as we think, is because we underestimate the human factor in design. And this is usually, well, it's music to my ears and as an architect, and know that thinking of architecture as a design, as creating an interface to human behavior and human activity is a hugely helpful approach when we want to focus on making architecture or making sustainable architecture work. So we often, when you look at policy documents and policy initiatives, sometimes I struggle with the thought that we are no longer designing for people, we are often just designing for metrics. So this notion of interface design in architecture is very important to emphasize. Next, please. So high quality architecture is often the elephant in the policy room. Next, please. I wanted to bring to you a publication that was recently released in Denmark by the Danish Association of Architecture Firms called Architects Document Your Value. Keep going. Which shows which gives a really good framework for architects to begin to use feedback to promote not just the environmental performance of their buildings, but also the cultural value. But one of the things, so the thing that ACE really emphasizes in this process is that feedback not only helps us improve our technologies and techniques and approaches in delivering sustainable architecture, but it also reconnects us with our end users and helps us think of buildings more as interface design challenges and objects that transform and live and have a life of their own for many, many decades. So these are just some examples of the feedback that the designers had. In this case, 25% more students in this school. There was an addition, there were 25% more students in this school, and there was a 40% rise in exam completion. Next, please. In the sports center, life cycle costs were down by 80%. Next, please. And this is just a quick slide about the value. So the value increase between fabric, just using the fabric first approach to renovate a building, or applying the whole building approach, increasing useful area, and while maintaining the same loan to value ratio by using an architectural approach. Next, please. Just some examples of ACE, of resources that ACE has collated over the years. So our focus is, we're increasing our focus on sharing knowledge and best practice between our member organizations. Next, please. Some more examples on guidance and examples of success. Next, please. Next. And yes, we have to scale up. And next, please. Yeah, final slide. I've just completed a book together with Hattie Hartman and Sophie Palsmakers about the role of design, the role of feedback in design and making sustainable architecture work. So it's with lots of examples to showcase what seems to work better and what seems to work less well in sustainable architecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I can't hear you.
Okay, now. Okay, voy a hablar en castellano porque creo que te están traduciendo.
Okay, I'm going to speak in Spanish.
Bueno, interesantísima, claro. Es un baño de datos espectacular.
Okay, that was very interesting.
Que nos has dado. Yo me quedo con
a great deal of data.
De 600.000 arquitectos, ¿no?
I wanted to take a pause on the more than 600 architects that integrate the European Council of Architects.
No voy a decir alineados, pero sí por lo menos con la brújula en la misma dirección.
And I wish that we were pointing in the same direction from this country.
Bueno, volveremos a ello en el debate.
We will come back to this during the debate. And without further ado,
Iñaki Alonso, cuando quieras.
I give the word to Iñaki Alonso when you want.
Activa el micro, Iñaki.
Cierto, disculpad. Nada, buenas tardes. Mil gracias, Miguel Ángel.
Good evening.
Un placer.
Thank you very much, Miguel Ángel. It's a pleasure to be here again in ASA. And thank you very much for inviting me.
Como bien sabéis, la gente que cercana a ASA, pues
as the people who are close to ASA know that we have been working for such a long time. I think I have a presentation, and in the meantime I'm going to tell you about it. I'm going to give you the number of SAT, who has been working on this for over 20 years. We started in 2001. And we are starting now, we are entering into 2021. And from this idea of designing and building sustainable buildings, or environmental buildings, we met with a group of technicians called Ecometer, who was trying to measure the environment in architecture. Through all these years, we have been reflecting around ecology and the environment and working together with ASA at some point. We have been working now with Universal Council, and each of them have their own perspective, a different approach, or a particular approach. And the key is that each time we can synergize more and we can advance together in the development of sustainability in architecture. We are specializing in ecology and technology. We are interested in ecology as a science within the biology, studying the relation of human being with the environment, and we think that process is architecture as our second skin, and that relationship is still in question right now in many aspects. Regarding climatic change, and the loss of diversity, and every category of impact. And the other category of that interests us is technology. How through technology we can help measure ecology. We have been specializing there through the developing of technological tools that are able to measure different aspects. Because I think the key right now would be quantifying what is measurable and what is unmeasurable. how can we perhaps measure all these different things so we can move forward? Because if not, it's very difficult that we can progress or improve ourselves. So what we did from Ecometer was developing cycle analysis tools in order to work on every indicator that are usually worked on through the tool itself of analyzing life cycles, so we can quantify them. And then the other part of the station is the diffusion or dissemination of knowledge through all these kind of debates, for example. And this is the way that we can share this knowledge. And we are implementing again the topic of technology within diffusion of information. I think this can help us to move forward much quicker because we are in a hurry. We have a certain urgency to share all these concepts with the society that many different associations have been working on. One of the keys that can help us understand this technology to make this technology more accessible, like carbon print or life cycle studies, is not a hell for the users. To make the complexity simple, which is a concept that I'm very inspired on, I think technology can make it a bit easier what is all very complex right now. We need to understand this from complexity because there are a very wide number of factors that affect our relationship with the environment. We are going to make an exercise on simplification, and we're going to make an exercise to speak only about CO2 or instead of climatic change. But we can lose the perspective that CO2 is perhaps the major impact within a jungle of impacts. We are on trend for a serious extinction in process of massive diversity loss, with acidification issues, of material resource scarcity, and all these affect our relationship and how we build our buildings. So speaking about climate change, we find a language and an indicator, which is carbon, or equivalent to oil, but we shouldn't stop reconsidering every factor that plays here. So surrounding carbon, we have realized that buildings used to waste a lot of energy, so they emitted a lot of CO2. Everything we built up to the crisis, 90% of constructions, and most of the buildings that have been built before the 80s, that were built without regulations, they are usually very deficient in the energetic aspect. So operational energy, or the usage of building, has played a very heavy role in terms of CO2 emissions. While the construction of buildings didn't have so much weight, but as we move onto zero or neutral energy buildings, we are displacing the weight of operational energy from 30% to a 30% in relation to energies from materials. So when by the time that we use a 100% renewable energy buildings, they must have a 0% CO2 emission, and they are 100% electrified. So in terms of CO2, there wouldn't be any emission. So the big challenge for the future would be lowering, since we are never going to be able to neutralize. It will be to lower the use of carbon in the construction materials, and we can even compensate them, and that is what we are proposing. And we are introducing the concept of neutral CO2. because they are either compensating through electrification, they are working on 100% renewable energy. This is not a plan for 2030 or for 2050. This is what we are proposing for 2021. Now, every building we build through 2020 are zero CO2 buildings. And so I think we need to generate a culture and generate institutions and generate legislature that can rebuild this like dinosaur of laws and regulations. But I wanted to make an appeal here for architects and clients and technicians, so that in a more like bottom-up way, we can start taking steps in this direction. We introduced 5 steps to make this process simple, to the path to zero CO2. The first one would be to be able to measure the carbon print of the building. We have proposed a tool, but there are more in the market. And here, as a society, we have a challenge as a Spanish society, which will be a collaboration challenge, and to establish a series of mechanisms and measuring standards that are the most homogeneous and standard that we can achieve, and that we can use, and I'm meaning specifically free database and public access database that are stable, and it can be used as reference, so that the life cycle analysis and carbon print in the building can be consistent. So we have been advancing in this area, but there is a lot of path to walk still. In terms of reference value, but we have a pending subject, which will be the databases. We have developed our own database, and together with the Torroja Institute, we are revising and re-examining our database with the aim to make it public and open in the Instituto Torroja, so that we can develop different tools, but from a common methodology, and especially a reference and a common database. The second point, once we have measured, would be to reduce, lowering, and obviously in order to be able to lower the carbon print, we need to measure it.
Yo te oigo, Iñaki.
Sí. Vale. Bueno, ahí veis la herramienta que hemos desarrollado en todas las categorías.
You can see there the tool that we have developed in every impact category. You can see how the carbon print is the biggest deal in a short term. But as you can see there, you have the 6 different categories of impact that have been established within the UNE regulation. What we have done here is the Entre Patios building, which we finished recently. Here we have the life cycle analysis from the A1 to 3 part, which is the material construction part. That will be the most impactful process. Then you have a part dedicated to transport and logistics, which will be A4. That is the impact during the process of construction, the amount of energy that were used through the construction to move the different cranes, or using a generator or anything that requires the construction. That will be A5. Then you have B4, which will be the substitution of the building that need to be changed, and how often do you need to change them. This is a very impactful process, part of the process as well. especially when you go to a more industrialized part of the buildings. And then you have operational energy, and in the case of Entre Patios, since it is 100% renewable in its usage, it didn't have an operational impact. But as you can see here, the construction area is around 392 kilos of CO2 per square meter. And I think this is the kind of concept that you will need to use as architects. In the same way that we manage the economical cost of the construction, we should need to start considering as well how much contamination produces. How much does it weigh in terms of CO2? Is it 400 kilos or 600 or 700? And doing that around common analysis methodologies. The second point, once we have a measure, will be to reduce and to lower. Once we measure, we realize how every part of the process in the building impacts the environment. And in this case, we have different strategies to minimize each part of the process by lowering demands to a minimum, or perhaps lowering the part both in the construction and the operational part. In the construction part, for example, we have the possibility to use different materials. Here in Entre for example, we did it with wood, and the environmental impact of wood in relation with other materials is very different. In terms of carbon, for example, is radically different. In a wall built with absorbed carbon, if you build a building through the capture of carbon, you're using through the material, but if you use concrete, you will be affecting the environment through the use of material. There are different strategies of isolation. So when we start realizing the impact by square meter of a material, we can start taking different strategies in the market. So there is not only in terms of aesthetics or price, which has been the traditional elements that have marked the decisions, but we need to add the environmental aspect. We go to the third step, and once we have measured and lowered the carbon print, we have inevitably we're going to have some carbon print. There might be, even in a farm, there might be a tractor or different machinery. So now we can take a further step as a conscious exercise, perhaps, to see that everything generates an impact. And so we need to add a process of compensation or balancing through the planting of new trees or new biodiversity projects. There are many projects available today that you can use to compensate your emissions. So to 1,300 tons of compensation through compensation programs. You have compensation of CO2 for like 10 euro, 50 or 60, depending on the absorption capacity of the program. Here in Entre Patios, we have been working with 3 different programs. One will be a reforestation project in Spain through a drone system. Another one would be a renewable project in Namibia. Another one about biodiversity in Kenya. With this project, we have tackled the 3 different aspects, both in terms of reforestation, of usage of renewable energy, and also to tackle the problem of biodiversity loss. we wanted to tackle the three different pillars of compensation. In this case, the compensation have been around 10,000 euros, which is a 0.2% of the budget. And you can introduce this as part of the project budget. The last point would be the electrification. To either make it 100% electrical or compensate that gap. The fifth would be the use of renewable energy. Here in Entre Patio, we have an installation based on. We have a 32 kilowatts of renewable energy. And on December, we are producing twice as much as we consume. So we have been calculating our expenses, and now the installation is actually working at half capacity. Because by the time we use it at 100%, we will be producing much more of what we consume. So we will need to make a strategy on what to do with accumulation of energy. So we are embarked on different projects like this Triodos Bank Office. This had a carbon print of 278 kilos per square meter. This is the second award winner in Europe. No, worldwide. This is the Greenpeace office, a 1,000 square meter office with a very low carbon print of 124. Mainly because we took very good care to select the materials that were used during the Reformation. And here, this Entre Patios is the project I was talking about before. This is our most emblematic project because we have incorporated every criteria that we have working on for many years. So we have all the part of carbon print management, of efficiency, but we have also incorporated a water project. 1,300 toneladas de CO2, 385 kilos metro cuadrado han quedado al final. And for the last one, this is another co-working that we finished this year, also as neutral CO2. We measure the whole carbon print following the same criteria. So what I wanted to transmit, and Talco is another project. We are waiting for license that is going to be also carbon neutral. And we are waiting for permission to start 10 different projects in Madrid and start a promoter for decarbonized buildings. A series of buildings that all follow all these steps. And we wanted to conscientiate society that you can do this. That we have the ability to incorporate all these tools and knowledge. So from the point of view of the technicians, we don't need to. We can't wait for more than 2021. We need to start introducing this concept as soon as we can. So thank you very much to ASA and to Miguel Ángel for inviting me. I hope we can share impressions during debate. Thanks, Iñaki. It was a pleasure to listen to you, and congratulations for all the projects and all the awards that speak about your trajectory, especially about all this like more intuitive concept before the 70s to a more like scientific approach of construction that we have now. You left another topic in the air about the ecometer and the base data, the accessibility, which has to do with what Judith said about the level tool, because many of us are already in this direction about open access to data, and I think it will be a nice talk during the debate. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce Ramón López Pérez from the Spanish Agency for Climatic Change. Good evening. Thank you very much for inviting us to participate in this debate, especially with all the important challenges that we are facing. We are going to talk about decarbonization from the central administration of Spain. What is our point of view? And what is clear is that the pandemic has revealed the importance on comfort in our buildings, because we had to spend a lot of time with them. This is merely, I wanted to share the GHG emissions from the 90s to the last data survey we realized. The upper line, the darker blue, would be the residential emissions, while the lighter blue would be the commercial and institutional sector. As you can see, from the 90s, emissions have been growing up until the 2010, when we had the economic crisis, where we had a important lowering of economical activity, which took us from 2010 to 2018. What I wanted to indicate here is only that we are in a moment of inflection. Right now we have the challenge of lowering emissions at the same time as we are increasing GDP. During the last year, in 2019, the survey showed a significant lowering, partly also because it was a warm year, but it's still a line that is on progress. But I think it will be interesting to start marching in the right direction. These are the goals that have been marked for decarbonization both for Spain and Europe. I wanted to show you how the goals have gone from to 55%, and how we are distributing this aim for decarbonization. First, you have the different countries included, which in Spain is like around 40%, and you have the major industrial sectors. Those sectors, by the 2030, they have a goal of lowering 40% of the emissions. And then the diffuse sectors, which are the construction or logistics, farming, wasting, and smaller industry, their aim is a minus 30%. And that aim is distributed between countries. For us, it would be a 26% reduction of diffuses. And here I wanted to show the new goal marked by the Council to reach a 55% lowering in the emissions. In this graphic, you can pinpoint the line showing the starting of the emission in Europe by the 1990. We get to that blue point. You can see how we are just below the aim. And later, the economic crisis has helped us to maintain it. Then the gray point will be the minus 40%. Now the orange will be the 55%. So if you think if this is complicated, you should know that in 2050 it should be a neutral emission. the public administration alone cannot do this. We need all the different organizations and associations working in this direction. In this graphic, I also wanted to pinpoint that the discontinued orange line would be the neuter.
Que se compensa con los sumideros de carbono, que es la parte que está por debajo de cero. La idea es que hay sectores en los que será muy difícil.
But you can see how this orange line can be compensated by the lines that are below.
Por ejemplo, sector residuos, no sé, quizá industria pesada que necesite grandes temperaturas. Pues ese residual que quede debe ser compensado con
those residues in heavy industry needs to be balanced by land use science and forestry. And it is going to indicate that there are certain sectors that transport that are not there because they have technological ways and strategies to reach zero.
Quería indicar algunas novedades.
I wanted to indicate some novelties in the European context that we have been recently launched. This ambition of reaching the 55%, for example. And this indicates that we are required to double the rehabilitation buildings in Europe. We need to duplicate that. We are not still in the 1% in Spain. We are even contemplating the possibility of taxing energy and CO2 during construction and transport. It is also including edification inside ETS. So there are different possibilities on the direction of decarbonizing over the following years. Renovation Web strategy. I wanted to signal and stress some basic points. On one side, the global sustainability of the construction, including materials, nature-based solutions, a focus on life cycle that we started working together with ASA and the Torroja Institute. The second point would be around the reviewing of construction products in order to also the Commission will be speeding up the work with normalization of standards of climatic resilience for building. So we'll be speaking in short about the National Plan for Energetic and Climatic Change. The last initiative from the European Union would be the taxonomy ruling that perhaps seems a bit far for us, but there are criteria to define actions and qualify them as environmentally sustainable or not. There are criteria that are developed through the delegated act, and basically they are going to tell us during the following years when we want to make some kind of renovation in a building, or if we want to build a new building, or if we want to build or rent a building, what characteristics the building must have to consider it as green. One of the essential tools would be the energetic Speaking about Spain, as you can see perhaps here, we have been recently developing the strategy, the long-term strategy for a modern economy. As you can imagine, this is a very wide strategy, which includes many sectors. And you can see here the plan for edification. You have noted the 28 million of tons of carbon emissions from 2020, and how they will transcend to 19 in 2030, to 7 by 2040, to 0 by 2050. You can see there a series of technologies that we are already working on that will allow us to advance to these aims. We will have different options, but the electrification of buildings, bomb heat. Speaking about national instruments, I wanted to mention the project for climatic change and energetic transitions, which is considering the climatic change within the strategy for the energetic sector and the urbanization. The plan for the recuperation, transformation, and resilience of Spanish economy will be fundamental over the next years. I think it's very necessary to use all these resources we have and make good use of this funding. 7,000 million euro until 2023. We also have the urban agency. I'm going to also be speaking about the integrated plan of adaptation to climatic change. I also wanted to name the stattal infrastructure, the national strategy for green infrastructure, which is defining green infrastructure of a coherent body that includes both the urban areas and the agricultural areas. The main point of green architecture would be the adaptation and the possibility to regulate, to thermically regulate or to prevent floods, the promotion of biodiversity. And finally, the topic of circular economy, in which the construction is an essential sector. Referencing the national plan, the integrated national plan of energy and climate, you can see the numbers that are planned by this plan. In terms of renovation of buildings, we will start by 2021 with 30,000 renovated residences, up to 2030, where we will build 300,000 buildings. In total, will be 1.2 million renovated buildings from 2021 to 2030. This is merely a planification, and perhaps we need to start stronger now that we have this resilience funding through COVID. Perhaps those funding will make a higher impact in renovation during the first years. Another numbers would be the improvement of energetic efficiency, and in exemplary use of the administration would be the evaluation of the renovation of public buildings and the ampliation to the surface of different institutions, both regional and local institutions. In terms of energy savings, all these measures are gathered here, what we will have in kilos. 4.756 kilotep en equipamiento residencial, en eficiencia energética. We will have in residential equipment, we have 5,623. And in energetic efficiency in freeze producing equipment. I'm not sure if you can see the numbers very well, but you have there. And until now we have talking about mitigation, which is the most commonly known, the lowering of emissions. And we are forgetting about something which is the adaptation to climatic change. Those are questions that we need to start facing now. These are unavoidable causes of climatic change that we already need to face. There you can see the different impacts that we are day after day we are more conscious about the effects of climatic change, like extreme events, floods, higher mortality caused by heat waves, change in demands and tourism, incrementing droughts. And in this sense, we have developed the National Plan for Resilience to Climatic Change, which is parallel to the 2021 PNIEC plan, which is currently being worked on by the Ministry of Work in Spain. Right now, we are still gathering suggestions and propositions that we can work about during the coming years. These different lines are vinculation and strengthen, and integration to the adaptation to climatic change, considering different scenarios of climatic change, elaborating urban maps with green areas, areas with low emissions. These are all concepts incorporated in the plan for every town of more than 50,000 people, which is very interesting for the planification of our cities. Another point of the plan will be the integration of the adaptation in the context of construction. And in this case, there is a lot of path to walk still in the terms of recuperation of fluvial waters and wastewaters, of green covering, wood, the utilization of wood or other renewable materials. And lastly will be the point about communication and urban participation. So in any of these lines, if you feel represented, you can support us and send your... I think Judith already talked about this. It is imperative to generate knowledge and share knowledge. And we have a web called Anteca, where you can see the different resources that we have there, like how to elaborate or develop a plan for adaptation for climatic change, how to lowering risk of flooding in buildings, and nature-based solutions, etc. Solutions that you can check in the web. On the web, you can also have an interface for the climate change in Spain, which is very interesting. In this screen, you can see the different scenarios of climatic change, regionalized, especially for Spain, with the data from IPCC. So you can choose either a territory, a city, or a geographical area that you are interested in, and research how different climate factors are going to evolve in this area. You need to choose the scenario that you are interested in and how the different variables work. And you're going to see how they are going to evolve through the coming years. We are finishing with this one. I only wanted to indicate that we have a lot of work to do still. The aim is very ambitious, and I think we need to work together, administration with social, with civil society, in order to advance. I think this is a very good moment because we are in a moment that could drive us in one direction or the opposite. We have the funding for the resilience funds, and it's very important to utilize them well. We are launching convocatories. The importance of the economical resources that they add is not what I wanted to stress, but the different typology of actions we want to promote. No, it wouldn't be only the traditional lines of funding, which would be the renovation of heatings or different materials, would be synergic with with adaptation to climatic change. And I wanted to share them with you because I think they are very interesting for the profession.
Las comento si quieres. Hay que pasar 2 slides para atrás. Ahí. Por un lado, la integración del cambio climático en infraestructura verde.
On one side would be the integration of climatic change in the planification of
mapas de clima
urban building.
Mapas de ventilación urbana, etc.
In,
Por otro lado, la adaptación de edificios para prevenir el exceso
on the
de
other
calor.
side, the adaptations of building to prevent excess heating would be very important.
Para los grupos más vulnerables.
The refitting of building for most vulnerable groups like education centers or health centers. And we are including the climatization of buildings based on natural coolants. This is a novelty using the ammoniac or hydrocarbons, which are substituting HFOs or hydrofluorofins with PCA of less than 150. Different line will be the opening of environmental shelters, the application of nature-based solutions in order to prevent risk or fire risk, risk of flooding, the intervention on public areas to mitigate or avoid the heat island effect, like natural shadowing, for example. And we are also including, which I think we mentioned before, the promoting of urban biodiversity, which is a usually forgotten topic, the improvement of urban infrastructure with the rehabilitation of rivers, the creation of flood areas, floodplains. And as I said, the design of low emission area is a topic that we will be speaking in the coming years. And finally, an open box for architects and designers to chip in with their ideas and design any kind of project that can impact on the resilience of urban areas and public areas. The reutilization of unused buildings, the usage of urban crops. There are many lines that we are interested in that we want to talk about in the coming years. And I will be finishing with this. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Ramón.
Thank you very much, Ramón.
Bueno, estaba tomando notas y me he quedado sin papel, ¿no?
I was taking note and ran out of paper. Very interesting. There are a lot of initiatives that you are taking from the climate change office in Spain. There are initiatives that we know very well, and we have had the chance to work with you. And we ended up speaking about low coolants and low impact coolants and the different scales we are speaking about. We are now finishing a new library in this space, and we are dealing with these two scales, the climatization and the coolants on one side, and the scale of the environment around the building, and how can we interact with it. So I think this is a challenge for our profession, that we need to keep forming ourselves in this direction, because I think no one can avoid to notice how complex all this topic is when they hear talking to you about it. I had 3 questions for the 3 of you.
Sobre futuros escenarios climáticos, ¿no? Pero es que
about renovation and future and possible futures, but we are having already questions from the public. The first of them has to do with renovation. Jorge Gallego is asking, who is an associate from ASA, who is asking about the renovation of parks. What strategies do you think there are to achieve the goals? And what impediments do you think exist to what impediments do you think exist to these strategies?
Ramón puede empezar, bueno, cualquiera, pero claro, fijaros que llevamos desde el año 2013, ¿no? Con la ley de la triple R que impulsó el gobierno.
Yeah, we have been with the triple R law from the government from 2013 and received several allegations. As an economic lever, we can say. Now we are in 2021 now. It has been 8 years of this law, which were integrated in different higher laws. We now are having the energetic renovation law in Spain. So Jorge was asking about the resistance that we can find within the system to resist this change and these strategies.
Sí, bueno, pues una pregunta muy recurrente, el tema de cuándo arranca la rehabilitación.
I think this is a very recurrent question. When do we start with the renovation? I think we are all very familiar with the problematics. This is a complicated dynamic to be broken. But the challenge is the goal will be to break the dynamic and we are all very familiar with the impediments which will come in terms of funding. Perhaps some fundamental option will be fiscal strategies. We also find trouble when we are trying to sell renovation through energetic savings, which might not be the best way to sell this energetic renovation. But I think right now we are going to be able to count on the resilience funding, and it is imperative to tackle the renovation of buildings from an integral point of view. And I not only mean involving installation, but the fact that the building is part of all this whole energetic transition. In terms of storage, in terms of connection between buildings, what we call intelligence indicator, the existence of local energetic communities, or even in our garage we'll have a charge point for our electrical vehicle. So buildings will need 180 degrees in order to be able to participate in this process of rehabilitation and energetic renovation. But we need to take step by step in order to advance.
Gracias, Ramón. No sé si Iñaki o Judith queréis decir algo sobre la rehabilitación, sobre las trabas, sobre el potencial.
I don't know if Judith or Iñaki wanted to say something about incentives and impediments in renovation.
Activa el micro, por favor, Iñaki.
Perdona, nada, sí, aportar Es cierto, la asignatura pendiente, llevamos mucho tiempo.
Yeah, it is true that this is a pending subject for us. We have been for a long time thinking about how we activate this idea. I have coordinated a report with many other architects, and we are finding a high expectations regarding the coming of the funds, but there is also a bit of anxiety regarding the developing of a more integral transformation, that we can talk about the environmental, social issues, the incorporation of fiscal issues as well. Not only funding from public administration, but also the fact that from the public administration could.
Bueno, van saliendo como muchas herramientas, ¿no? Y como decía Ramón en la presentación,
we are developing in general many different tools, and we are seeing this aim of changing from 230 to 250. I think it is very important that we change the trend.
primeros 5 años de este 2020 era prácticamente plana, y con estos fondos estructurales en 2021 realmente le peguemos un gran empujón 2021, 2022 y 23 y pongamos el nivel de
So we made a big push from 20 to 21, and we need to
60 o 100.000 viviendas en un par de años, ¿no? Para poder llegar a esas 300.000.
we need to probably have the challenge of building around 100,000 new residential during the first 5 years. But all this transformation has also an impact that we usually forget about.
Y de actividad para reformar todos esos edificios, ¿no? Y es cuando volvemos a meter la energía gris o la energía embebida.
And this is when we have to talk about gray energy and embedded energy,
que genera eso, ¿no?
and to think about also the impact that this is generating. An impact that will be necessary in this case in order to avoid further impact during the operation area. So I am a bit hopeful, actually, but I think this is the moment to act.
Gracias, Iñaki. Okay, Judith, I don't know if you want to say something about the renovation in buildings, about the potential. Okay, maybe Judith is not listening. I don't know. Okay. Bueno, si queréis pasamos, bueno, interesantísimo lo que decís, sobre todo esta última reflexión.
Okay, that was very interesting. Thank you very much.
I actually, before I do that, I have a question for Inaki Alonso, because I was really impressed with the quality and aesthetic of the project. And I think one of the things that we find in sustainable architecture is that, one of the comments that we often face is that buildings are either sustainable and ugly, or beautiful but don't perform. And I think that based on the information you presented through your projects, they're both beautiful and perform. And I just wanted to put the question back to you: in what does it take to do that? Do you have to have exceptionally well-informed clients? Do you put things in contracts that other people don't do? Do you do a lot more in-house than you would have normally done before in terms of project analysis? You showed the embodied carbon calculations, obviously, and it would just be interesting to know what does it take to get projects like this off the ground. And it does look like they're popular because you seem to be having more and more invitations to do them. So what do you think?
¿Me puedes traducir?
Sí. Bueno, básicamente te felicita por los proyectos, Iñaki, igual que bueno, yo creo que hacemos un poco todos, y pregunta cómo has conseguido llegar a esos resultados, ¿no? Preguntaba si a través de unos clientes informados, a través de, bueno, pues de un conocimiento técnico previo. Hay una parte justo ahí que se ha desconectado brevemente, pero creo que la pregunta iba por ahí, ¿no? Que ¿cómo has conseguido llegar a esos resultados a nivel de obra construidas reales con ese nivel de medición, ¿no? ¿Cuáles han sido las características de cada uno de los encargos, cómo han sido, ¿no?
Bueno, pues obviamente cualquiera que trabaje en sostenibilidad.
Well, obviously, for anyone that is working on sustainability, having a client as Greenpeace or Triodos Bank is already working a lot, I think, because they are already very conscientiated clients.
Sobre todo de Triodos Bank y Greenpeace, no tanto. Participamos en un pequeño concurso, pero realmente si no son estos clientes que están haciendo, en el caso de Triodos Bank, banca ética.
But if it wasn't for clients like Triodos, who are funding sustainable projects, or Greenpeace, if they are not making sustainable offices, I am not sure who is going to make them. So I am still, and I keep proposing for NGOs and companies working on sustainability, that anyone who is spouting the discourse of sustainability, and we can't forget that everyone needs to be in this discourse during the next following decade, and will create a greenwashing problem. I go to these companies and I say to them, if your discourse is about sustainability, your selling point and your working place needs to be as sustainable as it can in order for your values to be communicated and translated. And through these systems and this strategy, we are managing to get more of these projects. And on the side of residences, we have been working for a long time in Madrid, practically 20 years, studying different models of co-housing from Europe. This is also my house now, and there is a group of people that are very conscientiated from Ecologists in Action, in which the client is getting also very conscious. We had managed to convince big real estate companies, so we developed our own real estate company in order to work with sustainable buildings and collaborative buildings, and incorporating all the concepts that are linked with collaborative living. But it's not easy. But it is much easier when you have conscientiated clients like Greenpeace and Field. So, and thank you very much for your comments.
Pero si nos importa voy a saltar también al público, luego retomaremos, ¿no? Aunque esta vez una pregunta también para Iñaki.
We're gonna come back to another question from the public, from María Jesús González, from the Scientific Committee of ASA, who is asking, how do you compensate thermic inertia in wood?
Bueno, pues metiéndola solo en el suelo. O sea que aquí hay que manejar varios factores, ¿no? Un factor.
We need to handle different factors. One is energetic efficiency. So, in terms of climatic change in our climate, we will need thermic inertia. And from the point of view of the relationship between built area and the price of area in Madrid, we need to go for very thin walls, because if not, the construction price will be very high. So that option wouldn't be economically viable. You have a wooden forge with a concrete layer, concentrating all the thermic energy in that place. So we are sacrificing some thermic inertia that could go into the wall. We try to develop industrial buildings in dry, and the only place that we are using mass is in the ground. The walls would be for thermic energy and acoustic isolation. So here in Entre Patio, for example, we have a compression layer that has been a concrete wall, and it's compensated every day of winter with a low angle of the sun. We actually didn't have to turn on the heating, because we are managing to store most of the heat produced during the day.
Gracias, Iñaki. Bueno, la verdad es que
Thank you, Iñaki.
Más preguntas en el público. Voy a dar paso.
We are starting to have many questions from the public.
Con el debate hay bastantes preguntas, pero bueno, yo creo que en 10-15 minutos ya nos.
Because we have many questions now.
Hablábamos antes, efectivamente, hablando de la rehabilitación.
We were speaking earlier about renovation.
Como tú hablabais de la integralidad, ¿no? Es algo que el otro día
and both Ramon and you were talking about adaptability and how to add value to the European funding. And one way would be through integrality, to not disseminate these fundings to mass that end up in very small projects, or end up being only a green covering in a building or three street sustainable lighting, street lighting. So we need to add value in how we use this funding and these investments. And you spoke about the actives that we need to place in movement. And I was thinking about the Jacob's sentence that cities are. So probably what we need to do now are processes of activation and reactivation through procedures that they have been discussing. There is one more question from the public dealing with industrialization. I think we have already answered this in some part, but he's asking if you think this new industrialization is going to, or if we are going to have to convince promoters to get the buildings into the new renovation plannings.
No sé, Iñaki, yo creo que eres tú el que más sabe del tema, pero bueno, yo creo que es un paso más. El tema de la industrialización es fundamental.
I think this is one more step. The path of industrialization is essential for the decarbonization in construction. And I think we are seeing more and more examples in this direction. Yeah, there is a big interest and there are a lot of projects going on. There is a keen interest on industrialization, which from the 60s or the 50s. I saw an exhibition from Fuller in Madrid where they were already considering all these topics, and has been another of the pending subjects for us. But I think there are a lot of things being made. And logically, real estate companies are very interested in this, in terms of matters, in terms of time, but also in terms of economic value, which will be the combination of the residential building with the beak and the beam, and linked with the idea of circular economy, which could be the conclusion of why industrialization has not been implemented up until now with all these different factors. In order to not only to monetize but also to understand the industrial building, so that the building has an economic perspective on the long term. We are speaking about building that could be dismantled in 50 years, and for each of those materials, we will have a circular economy in order to recycle these materials. In 50 years, we are going to have a serious problem because resources are limited. And in 50 years, this won't be a mere anecdote, this thing about the circular economy. Buildings will be built already thinking about their dismantling. But the ones we are building right now will have to be dismantled, and the materials will have to be reused in different circles and in different cycles. So that is an economic value. And all of this is being incorporated within the concept of industrialization. We need to see the economy from the point of view of the long term, because this is a complex factor, and we are in the middle of the process of transformation of building and residences and industrialization. We are in the middle of a change of paradigm. But with such high impact that construction has on carbon emission, like around 40% during construction, it is very high, the impact that it has on our society. So the transformation needs to be very, very deep. And not only industrialization, but industrialization together with all these different things that we have talked today.
Muy bien, muchas gracias, Iñaki. Thank you very much, Judith. Y muchas gracias, Ramón. Me dicen
thank you very much, Ramón. Thank you very much, Iñaki.
Simultánea también, como sabéis.
We need to start finishing this event. I wanted to thank the speakers and all the people who have been listening.
Sintiendo esta permeabilidad a todas estas ideas y conceptos
and different ways feeling the permeability of all these ideas and concepts that we have been working on.
Vuestros estudios, vuestras escuelas.
I know that many of you are working in these same topics in your studios and your schools and with your clients. And I wanted to end up with this idea of Iñaki of designing for dismantling, and the idea of designing for future scenarios, but also to design for people. Thank you very much to everyone, and I'll see you on the next cycle in 2021.
Muchas gracias, Miguel Ángel. Muchas gracias.